I was thinking, how do you introduce Bill Faris? Many of you already know who Bill Faris is. Here's the way I think the best way to introduce him, and there's lots of things you could say. Marriage and family therapist. He's an author. There's so many things. Has famous grandkids. Yes, which he could probably tell you about. But here's the thing. When I think about how much God loves marriage, God brought us together in marriage, right? And there's this picture of Christ in the church that God wanted us to see through marriage. And so God is all for marriage, and he's all for healthy marriage. So then I got to believe that the enemy hates marriage and does anything he can to destroy any and all marriages. And then God created a man named Bill Faris, supported by Robin Faris. So the enemy must really hate Bill Faris altogether because he is constantly speaking into people's marriages all the time. Like daily, he is encouraging and building and strengthening marriages in his practice, at Refuge, with his friends, all the time. So I have to think, maybe one of the best ways to introduce Bill Faris is that he is an enemy of the enemy. And so we are glad tonight to be able to have Bill Faris come and share with us. He is the enemy of the enemy.
Thank you, Jeff. I've been called a lot of things in my life, but that's a new one. Yeah, I like it. I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you for taking an evening to invest in your marriage, in your spouse, in your life together. I'm so glad for this opportunity to be with you. And those of you that are watching on the live stream, which I understand we have a live stream tonight, and this is also going to be recorded. The reason I mentioned the recording part is that there are notes and stuff and things that I'll be running by you here that I don't want you to feel like you have to furiously write them down or something, because you can go back at some point and check out the recording. So really settle in. I'm going to be talking this evening about couples in transition. And I'm very happy to tell you that I have recently been working on a performance I'm going to be doing next month as Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof. And so I'd like to introduce tonight by saying, tonight we're going to be talking about transitions, right? There you go. So... and in my head, it's still going, da-da-da-da, da-da-da. Okay, stop. Okay. Transitions is an extremely relevant topic. All of us go through transitions, and so we're going to try to understand. This is something I teach on fairly often, but this is the first time I've ever taught it with couples going through transition in mind. So I kind of went back through my material and I tweaked it very specifically for tonight and for this audience, and hoping that God will really use it to help you as couples navigate transitions well together. And so just going to dive right in here with this little statement right off the top. Life is transitional. Life is a transition. Every living thing goes through transitions. You're alive, your marriage is alive, your world is alive, and so life is transitional. Or as some have said, constant change is here to stay. And that's really a good way to kind of capture this. Life is a collection of times and of seasons, of kind of chapters. One thing that we've done sometimes with people is had them create a book outline as if their life was a book. And they come up with a title of the book, and then they come up with, how would you divide my life up into book chapters? What would those chapter headings, those chapter titles be? And would there be like a section 1 and a section 2? And like what would be sort of a way to organize the seasons and times of my life, as if it were a biography? Or your marriage. What if your marriage were a book? What would the name of the book be called? All right, take it easy here, okay? And how would you kind of organize the chapters, the seasons of your life? And so thinking of it like that, life has movement. Life is transitional. And so doesn't it just make sense then that there is a wisdom in getting good at change and transition? because we're going to be living it forever in this world. And so wouldn't it be wise to get really good at change and transition? And so go now to a famous passage. Everybody from the 60s here is going to start singing it. But Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 8 tells us something about this when it says, there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep, a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love, a time to hate. A time of war and a time of peace. Seasons, times. That's the fabric of our lives. Transitions from one time, from one season to another is the rest of our lives and has been our lives so far. So tonight my aim is to get you better at navigating transitions as a couple, beginning by helping to just define what is a transition. What am I speaking of when I use the term transition? Because I want to distinguish it a little bit from change. There is change and there is transition. So let's kind of take a look at that. Because they are closely related, but I'm going to refer to change as the outward, observable changes and movements and differences between one life stage, one moment, one season, and another. But transition is the inward process, the psychological, spiritual, relational, what happens inside of us as we go through changes or as we approach changes or as we come to the other side of a change. We are in an interior transition, and that's what I want to focus on tonight. It's how we process change, and it's how we respond to and adapt to change, and it's how we navigate change within ourselves and as individuals, of course, but also as couples. As couples, we navigate change inside as couples. We feel our way through change. We think our way through change. We respond to the stresses of change, the opportunities of change from in here, individually and as a couple. And here's a little image I want to give you of transition as 2 rooms and a hallway. And here's what I mean. I want you just to imagine that you and your spouse have been living in an apartment or in a room on this end of a hallway, and you've got it decorated the way you like it, and you're comfortable and cozy there, and it's all good, right? It's your place, and you're all kind of settled in, and you invite people over, and you live your life out of this room. And then one day a note comes under the door from the landlord, and he says, "You've got to move out of this room." And you're like, okay, all right. Here comes some change and some transition. And he says, furthermore, I've got a great place at the other end of the hallway for you to move into. It's getting ready right now. It's not ready yet, but we're preparing it now for you to relocate from this room through the hallway to the other end. The room at the end of the hallway is going to be your new place. So get excited about that. But it's not ready yet. So you still have to move, and it's not ready yet. So you're going to live in the hallway. Yeah, you're going to brush your teeth in the hallway. You're going to take a shower in the hallway. You're going to have your friends over in the hallway. You're going to cook in the hallway. You're going to put your kids to bed in the hallway. You're going to live in the hallway. And you go, I don't know if I really want to live in the hallway. But that's the deal. That's the deal. And that is kind of the deal of transition. Transition is made up of 3 phases. And so this little illustration helps us to understand that we are in motion, not only in the change in location from room A to the hallway to room B. Those are the changes, but inside what's going on in you and in your spouse, when you're in that process of trying to absorb that change and transition through it interior ways. So let's talk about these 3 phases of transition. And here's a little key I want you to remember. It doesn't matter if the transition is small, medium, or very large. It's the same 3 phases every time. There's always these 3 phases to every transition. And so the 3 phases are phase 1, the ending phase. We're going to look at these a little more closely. Phase 2, the wilderness, or some call it the neutral zone. And phase 3, the new beginning. All transitions, small, medium, and large. Ending, hallway, middle, wilderness, neutral zone, new beginning. Always those 3. So we'll look at those more closely, but get those in mind because we'll be referring to this. Now, if you're a fan of the book of Exodus, are you thinking of something right now? Yeah, you're thinking of Moses and the children of Israel as they transition from 400 years of slavery under Pharaoh in Egypt. That ended on the night of Passover, and then they went right over the Red Sea, through the Red Sea, directly into the Promised Land. Isn't that how the story goes? No. That's how we always want it to go. But that's not how it really goes. We go out of the first phase and into an awkward and uncomfortable middle phase, and then into the new beginning at last. And so that's another good way to think about transition, is like it's kind of like the Exodus experience in Scripture. But all have these same 3 phases. Now, all beginnings begin with endings, and all these wildernesses are awkward. The middle phase is always awkward. And the new beginning, we're going to see in a little while, does not always come with fanfare and jump right in front of us on the scene. Sometimes it sneaks up on us, but nevertheless, it's those 3 phases. And so some examples of some transitions we will likely face as couples. Here, I'm going to give you a couple, then I want you to put your thinking caps on and give me some more that you would think of as transitions that couples will likely face. Here's just a couple to get us started. A arrival of children or a prolonged infertility. Both of those are transitional experiences for a couple. Career change, vocational change, the empty nest, a move or a relocation, a crisis in health or other sort of crisis, different life stages, different life stage transitions. So what are some other transitions that you think of when you think of transitions that couples go through? Anybody? Yes? Retirement and the life stage of retirement. And retirement is a serious transition for a couple as well as for an individual. Any more? What are you thinking? Yes? Teenagers! Teenagers are transitional. They're agents of transition, for sure. Because they're what? They're in their own transition. And you're going to get pulled into it. Yeah. What's another one? Yes? Long-term sickness, health crisis, a prolonged ordeal, or a prolonged joblessness, a lot of things that we're sort of very aware of right now in our society, right? Very good, yeah. One or two more. Yeah.
Well, you talked about prolonged illness. It prolongs the end is death. So
Yeah.
losing a spouse or a husband.
Absolutely. Kind of the last great transition a couple will face is the loss of one another. And I don't know about you, but I have been witness to this a number of times. I'm sure some of you could tell this story. My own grandparents were a situation where one of my grandparents passed away. At the time of their passing, the other grandparent didn't show any signs of ill health or distress, but within a year they passed away. How many of you have seen that happen? That last great transition of a couple, sometimes one will will pass and the other will soon follow. It's rather remarkable when that happens. It doesn't always happen, but that whole final stage, life stage of transition. How about one more? Yes? Taking care of our parents as they are in that last tunnel of transition, and we are trying to help them, and we're definitely pulled into their transition. You get the idea that some transitions we choose, I think I'm going to go back to school and get a degree and so, or I'm going to change my vocation, or I'm going to get involved in this new ministry. I'm going to choose this transition. I'm going to start this new friendship with, or some transitions choose us. And we get pulled into the gravity of a transition as a couple. And we suddenly find ourselves having to navigate a new transition. So some choose us and some we choose. But again, all three have those same three phases. So let's look at each of them a little bit more closely now. So phase 1, we're calling the ending phase. It's the saying goodbye phase. And all new beginnings begin with endings. All new beginnings begin with endings. Isn't that interesting when you sit and think about that for a minute? You're saying goodbye to something, to someone, to some stage of your life, to some way that things used to be. You're closing the door on that room and entering into the hallway, and the door locks behind you, and that room is now done. And so you are saying goodbye, starting with endings. Frodo Baggins leaves the Shire, St. Paul says goodbye in Acts 13 and starts his first missionary journey. He says goodbye to a whole lot of things as he begins that new adventure of ministry. King David leaves his sheep and goes and faces Goliath and goes and faces Saul and goes and faces a lot of things. Of course, I have to say this, Tevye and Golda get on the ship bound for Chicago at the end of Fiddler on the Roof, and they're going to have a whole new beginning. They're going to say goodbye to Anatevka and a whole life that they knew, a whole way of life that they knew. So they all begin with endings. A man named William Bridges, I'm going to quote a couple times, wrote a book called Transitions. I highly recommend it. And this is something that he has to say. Transitions begin with an ending. To become something else, you have to stop being who you are now. To start doing things a new way, you have to end the way you are doing them now. To develop a new attitude or outlook, you have to let go of the old one you have now. And that's certainly true for individuals. It's also true for couples. For couples to engage a new way of living, a new way of doing, a new way of being, a new way of responding to life, they have to say goodbye and let go of things that are familiar and comfortable and understandable, and be willing to go into that awkward middle and adopt new things. Now, this is very, very scriptural. I mean, how many times did Jesus tell us, unless a seed fall into the ground and die, it remains alone. But if it says goodbye, if it dies, it is reborn as a beautiful new plant. And he that would save his life must first what? Lose his life. So this is a principle of change and transition that is spiritual, it's practical, it's marital, it's familial, it's in any area of life. This releasing is always phase 1. And so I'm going to have you say this with me. This is kind of the summary. I'm going to say it and then I'll have you repeat it. The first task in transition, in navigating transition, the first task is to let go. Everybody? The first task is to let go. Turn to your spouse. The first task, honey, is to let go. Let it go. And what feelings come up for you when you hear, let go? Let go. Say goodbye. Stop that way of doing, being, responding, and take on a new one. Is that, for some people, exciting? Oh, great, a new adventure. Oh, good. This is going to be interesting. This is going to be fun. I love new adventures. We call these people change adopters. They're relatively comfortable with change and transition. They like to kind of engage new things. They're kind of always looking down the road and kind of imagining a new future of some kind. Life is an adventure. Bring it on. Bring on the transition. What lies ahead is likely to be better than what is now. And so these adopters are natural optimists, and they are restless explorers, and they're probers of the future, always looking at what could be. And they are creative, imaginative disruptors. They're your disruptors. In your family, in your church, in your home, in your workplace, in your ministry, whatever. They're the disruptors. They're always trying to bring something new about. And you're like, okay, not so fast, slow down. I gotta, yeah. But that's the adopters. Sometimes in some fields they call them the early adopters. The new technology comes out, and they're the first in line to get that new. Oh, I want to explore that. Oh, I want to see where that will take me. And they're the early adopters of technology, the early adopters of change and transition, and they're kind of the go for it people, right? And I want to know: are you married to one of those? I see some heads going, yep. And are you a little exhausted? Possibly. Yeah, could be. Yeah. Maybe you are one of those. And maybe you're not married to one of those. And that's given you no small amount of anxiety in your life. So there's different ways to kind of think about this. But the other kind of contrasting role to the adopters is the resistors. They are the resistors of change and transition. They like it here. They like it where we are now. And they're builders, and they're cultivators, and their roots want to go deeper into what it already is. And they want to extract the maximum from what is right now. And they're not looking for change, and they're not looking for transition, and they're not looking for the new and the adventure excitement of the future. They're rooting in deeply in the now. They're natural nesters, and they're risk averse commonly. They're not big fans of taking new risks. And they're builders, and they're settlers, and they're focused on today, and they're dedicated, stabilizing conservationists. Are you married to one of those? Now, it gets really interesting, doesn't it? When a resistor is married to an adopter. And one of them is it's the old Dr. Doodle, it's the push me, pull you, animal. It's like they're going in two different directions all the time. Or actually, one of them's trying not to go anywhere, and the other one's pulling the other one by the hand, going, come on, let's go. And I want to just say something very clearly right now. Which of them is living the correct way, and which is living the incorrect way? Which one of them is the good person, and which one of them is the bad? Who's right and who's wrong? You see where I'm going with this? It's not a right, wrong, good, bad, correct, incorrect question. It's just how you are. And there's no shame in being your natural inclination. Now, we all know that God really likes to mess with us that way. God will take a resistor and throw them into the middle of something until they are so over their head they can't see straight, and they learn all kinds of faith lessons and all kinds of growth by having to just thrash about in an environment that they just are so uncomfortable in. But they've come out the other side going, wow, I really grew from that. Now, let's just stay right here. And you know that God takes some of our adopters and he closes them in and shuts them into a space where they can't move around a whole lot. And they're struggling to break out of the routines and the constrictions of life. And they're anxious and they're antsy, but they're learning to trust and wait and not be in a hurry. And so God, in the formation of our souls, is often using our spouse, our situation, someone else's transition that we're getting pulled into to sort of mess with our favorite one, right? But it's okay. It's part of how he works in our life. You're not bad for being whatever you are, your preference. And we're all a little of both. Nobody's entirely one or the other of those. There's something of the adventurer in everyone. There's something of the stabilizer, root person in everyone. But we have a preference, some a lot more than others. And God's involved in the formation of our discipleship by sometimes kind of messing with throwing us out into the hallway or constricting us in a way that feels uncomfortable. And it's good if you understand that that's his program for our development. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. So we're all a little bit of each, but we have a preference. Now, let's not forget that the biblical formula for marriage, and this is the only phrase I know of in the Bible that is like this. Listen to this. In Genesis, in chapter 2, the end of the passage that ends, for this reason, chapter 3, a man shall leave father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. It's a commentary on the whole story of Adam and Eve and God bringing Eve to Adam and the whole process of the animals and all of that, which I won't go into, but it ends with, for this reason, in light of all this, man shall what? What's the first thing the man shall do? Leave. Goodbye. It's the ending phase. It's letting go. And what? Cleave. The new beginning is about cleaving. It's about reattaching. It's about starting a new connection. And so there's that there. Now we jump forward to Matthew 19, and Jesus is in a discussion with the Pharisees about divorce, and their question is put to Jesus, well, Jesus, what do you have to say? Are you taking this side of the issue or that side of the issue? And Jesus doesn't even address their question because they're trying to get him to take a position on the law of Moses and interpret what Moses said we could do in terms of divorce. And Jesus jumps over that all the way back to creation, to the Genesis passage, quotes it, and says, you don't understand. From the beginning, it was not so. In the beginning, it was, for this reason, man shall leave father and mother, cleave to his wife, two shall be one flesh. He quotes it. And then we get another reappearance of that same phrase. Anybody know where? In an epistle? Ephesians 5, in Paul's great discussion of the spiritual purpose of marriage. And at the end of his whole discussion of marriage is like Christ and the church and that whole thing that he lays out there so amazing in chapter 5 of Ephesians, then at the end, he quotes it. For this reason, a man shall leave father and mother, cleave to his wife, two shall be one flesh. Isn't that interesting? It's the only phrase I know in the Bible that it's like the greatest hits. It's like Genesis, Old Testament, Gospels, and epistles. Like it makes the whole, actually half of it appears again in Colossians. So there's a message here. Transition and change is about leaving and cleaving. It's about moving through a process of transformation, and your marriage begins with an ending. So now let's take a look at this phase 2, which is this wilderness experience that I mentioned. The messy middle, the awkward middle, the neutral zone, the hallway, whatever you want to call it. The biblical images are the Exodus, David between his anointing by Samuel, and then how many years goes by until he's crowned as king? You know, that whole huge hallway he had to go through of being even persecuted by Saul in the wilderness. Esther and Ruth before and after Boaz, you know. Joseph and Mary in Egypt, they're in that awkward middle. They're not. This is like, as a couple, when you're in that transitional center point, you're not who you were and you're not who you're going to be. You're somewhere in between. As an individual, if you're going through that, you're not who you were anymore and you're not who you're going to be yet. you're in transition. You're in that awkward middle. Paul, who after his conversion is in Tarsus and he's in Arabia and he's got this 13-year period before he goes to Jerusalem to be blessed by the other apostles and released on his first missionary journey. And so there's this long hallway for Paul of that middle phase. It's the waiting period between the resurrection and the second coming of Christ. We're in the hallway when it comes to our relationship with the personal presence of Jesus, the resurrection and the second coming. And here we are in the middle, awaiting and moving through that awkward experience of, well, it's not like it was with Jesus when the disciples walked with him, and it's not like it's going to be when he comes again. We're in this kind of relationship with Jesus. So the characteristics of this second phase is like detachment and disorientation and disruption and waiting and adaptation and dependency on and trust in God and tension. Tension. I call it doing the disses. When you're in the wilderness, you do the disses. The disappointment, the discouragement, the disorientation, the disconnection. It's like you're doing all the dis things when you're in the wilderness. And there are two classic temptations when you're in the wilderness. One is, oh, please, let's go back. Let's please go back to when I knew who I was, I knew where I was, I knew how to do things. I like my old room. I don't like living in the hallway. Please, and you're pounding on the door of the old room. Let me in, let me in. And the other is to rush forward, to just get something going that's new and different just because I hate the tension of this wilderness. I don't like this awkward middle anymore. So then you're pounding on the door of their new room going, let me in, let me in. But the middle, the wilderness is where God does some of his best work in us as individuals, as couples. This is where he turns over the soil and really gets us to go into deeper places that we would not normally choose to go. Learning how to trust, learning how to communicate, learning how to deal with the stresses and the tensions of change, learning how to understand my partner who's going through this differently than me, even though we're going through the same transition in another sense. And so we go through this time. And so in the wilderness, couples, they fight impatience. They experience temptation. They encounter miracles. Hey, what's one of the characteristics of the wilderness in the book of Exodus? Miracle after miracle after miracle. Do you know that when you're in transition, one of the places you should be looking for miracles is when you're in that awkward middle? Miracles of provision, miracles of guidance, miracles of care, miracles of revelation, miracles of encounter with God, miracles of breakthrough in so many different ways. That's also true of the wilderness. But we battle longings, and we undergo drift, and we get a little lost, and we kind of don't know where we are, and it's really awkward. And we will go through those transitions like that more than once in the course of a married life together. And sometimes when we're in that awkward middle, we might look at ourselves and we might look at our spouse and we might go, have we lost everything? Is this marriage even working? Did we take a wrong left turn somewhere? Are we off the tracks? Not necessarily at all. You might just be in transition. You might just be in that awkward hallway, trying to cook your meals in the hallway, trying to live your life where it's weird. And it's just a hard patch, a hard season of adaptation and change, full of temptations and longings and challenges and miracles and all kinds of things. And here's the thing. The two great temptations are always there. Go back. Find that old thread and pick it up again. Here's the stereotype, the guy in his midlife who goes back and he gets the Corvette and the blonde and the chain, that whole thing. Yeah. No, don't be that guy. Okay. Or rush forward. I do work with twice a year. I'm involved in a divorce recovery workshop, and I always talk to the divorce people in the recovery workshop about, hey, sometimes when you're in that awkward middle transition of divorce, following divorce, and you're in that wilderness, it's tempting to make a bad bargain with a new partner just to get something going, because who likes loneliness? So there's all of these things that are sort of like in the wings of transition. As a couple, we should be aware of them, and we should try to work our way through them. And so here's the thing. The only way through the wilderness is through the wilderness. There's no fast forward. There's no fast backward. It's just straight ahead, one foot in front of another until you get through. So the second task is to what? Wait patiently. So we repeat that with me? When you're in the wilderness, the second task is to wait patiently. Tell your spouse, the second task is to wait patiently. What feelings come up for you when I say, wait patiently? Uncomfortable feelings, or, yeah, I'm fine with that. I'm really good with waiting patiently. Yeah. Feelings come up around let go. Feelings come up around wait patiently, right? Third phase is the new beginning. Let's talk about that. The new beginning is a state of mind as much as it is a change. It's now, the resistors may be slower to catch up to a new beginning. And so, yes, you change something outwardly, but the resistors are still catching up inside to that change. So they might be lagging behind the adopters who are like rushing into the new beginning, going, oh, goody, we're here, and let's do this, and let's decorate the room this way, and let's get this furniture in, and let's do that. And the resistors going, wait a minute, whoa, slow down. And so you can see sometimes change and transition happen almost simultaneously. Sometimes change throws us into transition. Sometimes transitions throw us into change. So they're not always on the same timeline, and sometimes one of us as a partner is not on the same timeline as our partner is in our couple relationship. And so there we go. So the new beginning might just sneak up on us. Listen to William Bridges here. We forget how indirect and unimpressive most new beginnings really are, and we imagine instead some clear, conscious steps that we ought to be taking. When we are ready to make a new beginning, we will shortly find an opportunity. Let me just say that last line again. When we are ready to make a new beginning, we will shortly find an opportunity. I think of it, new beginning often is not so much a border you cross from the wilderness into the new beginning, like the border between Arizona and California. It's more like a stream that trickles out of the wilderness, and as you follow it along, it gets a little bit into a stream, and then a little bit into a creek, and then a little bit into it, and then pretty soon you go, oh my gosh, I'm in the new beginning. We're in the new beginning, honey. Oh my gosh, look at this. And it's often like that. So the new beginning often kind of trickles out. We kind of catch ourselves picking up a new wave of transition and change and adapting to it, and then we are in, oh wow, we're in a new beginning. So no matter how it arrives, as an individual or as a couple, in the new beginning, we will in some ways look different than the couple that started that journey. You will look different as a couple when you have said goodbye, gone through the wilderness, and started to engage the new beginning. You will look different, you will feel different, you will be different as a couple when you go through that transition or those transitions. Listen to this. I think this is a good scriptural reflection of a new beginning experience from the Psalms. Lord, you alone are my portion and my cup. You make my lot secure. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance. Like, we made it. Thank God we're in the new beginning at last. Now, you might have torn clothes and a broken leg and a black eye, and you may be fighting as a couple, and you may, have a trail of things behind you, but you have made it through the wilderness, and you're in the new beginning, and you are wiser for it. The third task is to firmly attach. The third task is to attach. The new beginning is about reorientation and reattachment and resetting the table of your life as a couple, as a family, and getting involved in what is the new normal, creating that new normal. So, I've given you 3 phrases. I'm going to say them, and then I want you to repeat them after me to reflect the 3 phases of the transition. The first one is let go. The second one is wait patiently. And the third one is attach. So everybody say this with me. Turn to your spouse and say, let go, wait patiently, attach. And it's like, rinse, repeat, wash, whatever that is. It's like that's going to be over and over our life. So let me kind of close with a little bit of advice and an exercise or two for us. So first of all, remember transitions come in small, medium, and large sizes. So you're probably dealing with a transition of one of those 3 sizes tonight as you're sitting here as a couple. Are you in transition right now as a couple tonight? Small, medium, or large, right? You may very well be in one even tonight or very recently in a transition. So what I'd like you to do is to discuss with your spouse what is a transition we may be currently navigating. See if you can give a name to the transition. What is the transition? What would we call the transition we are currently navigating as a couple? Take a minute with your spouse and see if you can give a name to a recent or present transition. When did it begin? Where are you? We'll talk in a minute about where you are on the map, but let's just see if we can name it first. My wife and I moved in June. Moving is a big transition. We're still in that transition. It's not over. 6 months later, we're still in that transition. That would be the biggest transition we've most recently probably taken on. But you have some. So that's helpful. So my first bit of advice is see if you can name it. Give it a name. Raising teenagers, recovering from reversal, walking our parents through the end of their life. Whatever that name is, it's helpful to just have a name, a handle to kind of name your transition so you can kind of talk about it with understanding. And the second thing here is understand that you and your spouse may be experiencing the same changes, but very different transitions, right? Same change, but you're in it differently, right? And so be kind and understanding of your spouse's transitional experience. No one's right, no one's wrong, no one's good, no one's bad. They're just where they're at. You're just where you're at. So be understanding that if your spouse is in a different part of the transition than you are, try to be patient, understanding, and curious to better understand what it's like for them to go through the transition. I tend to be an adapter. I tend to be a person who disrupts and shakes up our life every so often. And I remember many years ago, one of my mentors, when I was entering the counseling ministry, and this man had been a part of our lives by that time for quite a while. He got to know us pretty well. And he said to me, Bill, you're like a guy who gets in a helicopter and you fly over a jungle and then you see a clearing, and then you land the helicopter in the clearing, and you start to explore the new clearing. And the rest of us are like hacking our way through the jungle with machetes, trying to find you. Like, where did you go? And then, right about the time we get to the clearing that you've been exploring, you're back in the helicopter and you're off to the next one. Like, it's exhausting, So after I kind of started working on a journal of my own life based on William Bridges' suggestion in one of his books, I realized that up to that point, and this is some years ago now, I had initiated 6 major transitions in our life. And I went to my wife and I said, honey, I think I've taken us through 6 very disruptive transitions. They're all good. None of them were bad, but they were disruptive and hard. And I said, are you okay? And she said, yes, I'm okay. Now, she's taken me through some transitions too, because she went back to school to finish her bachelor's and her master's degrees in her 50s, and after a major accident. And so that was disruptive for me. And I was proud of her, and I was happy to go on that journey with her. But yes, it was hard, and it was tense, and it was exhausting, but it was very worthwhile. So your spouse, be understanding. Your spouse may be in a different place. And so, you could ask your spouse, where are you? We're going to come to this in a second. Where are you right now in the transitional process, and how are you with this transition? So we're going to say, okay, the first thing is remember to name the transition. Understand that your spouse may be in a different phase or place with the transition than you. And third thing is look for what I call pockets of grace that God gives us in transition. They come in 3 sizes too: small miracles, medium miracles, and great big fat old miracles. And God gives us pockets of grace and miracles in transition, so look for them and name those too as a couple. How has God supplied remarkably, amazingly, miraculously? How has He guided us? How has He led us through this hard thing? How has He supported us? Who has He brought into our life at just the right time? There's a lot of questions you could sort of like put around the question of where and how has God supplied a pocket of grace right when we needed it? And so I'd like you to take a second here and discuss with your spouse, what is one way that you are experiencing grace in our current or our recent transition? Ask your spouse, how is God giving you grace for this transition and change that we either are now in or recently were in? Would you take a minute with that? Where are you finding grace pockets? Okay, let me just give you a couple more tips here. Accept the fact that transition, change, and growth are often inelegant. I have a counselee who I love a lot. He's a young man. He's recently been through a divorce, and he's really come a long way in the last 3.5 years since his divorce. It's amazing how his life has changed. But he's very athletic. He's very put together in a lot of ways. And I was talking to him when he was kind of a mess, when this was all going on. He was trying to emerge from this transition of his post-divorce time. And I said to him, you got to remember, growth is often inelegant. And he looked at me and he goes, I hate inelegance. You know? And some of us just don't like the embarrassing side of change and transition where we look like we're kind of stumbling along and making all kinds of messes as we're trying to go through transition. But relax. It's okay. Transition is often inelegant. It's not often beautiful. And it can be kind of a mess. Do you know anything about what happens when a caterpillar becomes a butterfly? Do you know that you read about it, it's fascinating, when the caterpillar goes into the cocoon as a caterpillar, which looks nothing like a butterfly, and then it goes into that transitional middle phase, right? It says goodbye to caterpillarness. It goes into the wilderness, the middle, and they say that it basically just decomposes itself into a mush. It just becomes an unrecognizable mass of mush. But there are certain cells that are like anchoring cells that are the things around which everything then begins to reorganize into butterflyness. And it takes time. It's a messy, mushy mess. But over time, these anchoring cells begin to reorganize and then recreate this creature from a caterpillar until it emerges as a butterfly. That's a very apt description of the inelegance of transition. So if you find yourself fighting and struggling and aching and frustrated and tense and you make wrong decisions and you have to backpedal and you accepted one of the bad bargains of either trying to rush ahead or go back or whatever, and it's okay. Relax. You'll get it. You'll figure it out. And it's important to give yourself some grace and give your partner some grace in that regard. Prepare as much as you can for the transitions that you properly expect. So there are some transitions you know are coming. Retirement, death of parents, the blessing and the emptying of the nest and the blessing of the children into adulthood, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so there may be these changes that you can anticipate, and you can get yourself a little more packed for the journey on the front end. And that's a good thing if you can do that. If you can just slow down and focus and prepare for that next transition that's just ahead. That's a good bit of advice. Prepare your hearts. Have important conversations. Grieve the losses that go with the ending phase. There are often some grievous things that happen around saying goodbye to the first room. Accept the inevitable tensions. Attach purposefully to the new normal. And two more. Journal your transitions if you can. Now, some people journal by actually writing in journals. I do that about once a week. Other people journal every day. Other people, I have a friend that journals with art. She does art journaling. She does journaling by creating artistic pieces that represent different seasons, times, experiences of her life, and that's how she captures it. So however you journal, however you capture those moments of transition and change, do it, because then you can have a ready reference book of what God has taught you through different transitions in your life. Not only is that good for you, but you could pass them on to your children or to others and say, this is some things that we've learned in some of these transitions that we've been through. And so journaling them can be a very good thing. What are the faith lessons? What were the hard parts? How have I grown? How have we grown? Finally, memorialize your transitions. Try to find ways to celebrate them, to memorialize them, to honor the past as part of your story, to celebrate your progress. You did it. You got to the new normal. You got to the new beginning. Worship the Lord. He's faithful. He got us through. He's here. And so that's another thing we can do. So let me just review those for you really quickly to the tips. So remember that transitions come in small, medium, and large sizes. See if you can name them. Look for the pockets of grace and provision that God is supplying. Accept the fact that growth isn't elegant often. prepare as much as you can for the things you can prepare for. Journal your transitions and celebrate your transitions as you memorialize them. Worship and be grateful. Let's close in prayer together tonight. And I want you just to take your partner's hand. And I want to give us about 20 seconds here to just be quiet. And I want to just do this little exercise with you. I want you to focus very strongly on the hand of your partner that you're now holding. I want you to feel the weight of their hand, the texture of their hand, the warmth of their hand, the strength of their hand, the tenderness of their hand. And I want you to feel their hand in your hand, and your hand in their hand. And as you do, just recognize the goodness of God in giving you that hand to hold in this life. Sometimes it's been hard. Sometimes you've pulled away from that hand, and other times you've reached for it. But just right now, thank God for the hand you're holding, your partner, your mate, your spouse, your beloved. And as you do, we just say, come, Holy Spirit, flow with gracious, powerful compassion through our lives as we engage change and transition as a couple. Help us in our weaknesses. Help us to be aware of our partner and where they're at, and to be compassionate and understanding. Help us to find and recognize those grace pockets that you have put in our way, along the way, and help us to wait patiently, to trust. Help us to grieve the things we need to grieve, to live in the tensions of the wilderness, and then, Lord, to enter with new faith into the new beginnings that you give us. We are so grateful for what you have brought us through, whether we've been married here tonight a year or 50 years. We're grateful that you have brought us this far together through change and transition. And we bless your name for your faithful, good, and kind love. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, everybody. It's good to be with you tonight.
This has been a presentation of Refuge Calvary Chapel, Huntington Beach. For more information about our ministry, please visit refugefamily.com or call 714-891-9495.
Set free.